He thought he had it all: wealth, power, and a new wife who could give him the air he always wanted. But when betrayal shattered his world, he was forced to face a devastating truth. The woman he abandoned had everything he lost, and more. What happens when the past comes back to haunt you in the most unexpected way? Stay tuned, because this story will leave you breathless. Welcome back, dear viewers, and if you're new here, we're thrilled to have you join our storytelling family. If you love heart-wrenching tales of love, betrayal, and shocking twists, then hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Today, we bring you a story of a man who thought he could replace true love with wealth and power, but fate had other plans. What happens when the woman he abandoned comes back stronger than ever, holding the very thing he always wanted? Stay with us till the end, because this story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. And don't forget to like, comment, and share if you enjoy these gripping stories. Ethan Carter was the man every businessman envied and every woman desired. A self-made billionaire, he had built his empire from the ground up, turning Carter Enterprises into a household name. With his sharp suit, undeniable charm, and commanding presence, he was the epitome of success. But his greatest achievement, he often told himself, was marrying Ava. Ava was the kind of woman who turned heads, not because of extravagant beauty, but because of the warmth that radiated from her. She had a smile that could melt even the coldest hearts, a laugh that sounded like music, and a kindness that made the world seem a little less cruel. She was his safe haven in a world full of cutthroat deals and high-stakes meetings. Their love story was the kind people only read about in novels. Ethan had met Ava at a charity gala years ago, and while every other woman in the room had been vying for his attention, she had been completely disinterested in his wealth. That had intrigued him. She wasn't impressed by his money or his power. She was impressed by his mind, by the way he thought, by the dreams he chased. And that was enough to make him fall head over heels in love. For years, their marriage had been the picture of perfection. Their mornings started with whispered confessions of love over coffee. Their nights ended with intertwined fingers and hushed promises of forever. Ethan would come home late from the office, exhausted, only to find Ava waiting for him with a warm meal and a soft kiss. She never complained, never demanded. She was his partner in every way, standing by his side through every challenge, every setback, and every triumph. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, the billionaire and his devoted wife, living in a glass mansion that overlooked the city skyline. But behind closed doors, behind the laughter and the elegant parties, there was a void neither of them spoke about, a shadow that loomed over their happiness, growing darker with each passing year. Ava couldn't have children. They had tried. Oh, how they had tried. Doctor after doctor, treatment after treatment. Hope bloomed and withered like the seasons. Every pregnancy test was a cruel reminder of what they couldn't have. Every baby shower invitation from friends felt like a dagger to Ava's heart. She had seen the sadness in Ethan's eyes when he thought she wasn't looking, the way his hands clenched when colleagues brought their toddlers to company events. He never said it outright, but she could feel his disappointment, his silent longing. At night, Ava lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was enough, if love alone was enough. She had suggested adoption once, hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan had gone silent, his jaw tightening. "It's not the same," he had finally said. "I want a child of my own." His words had sliced through her like a blade. She loved Ethan with every fiber of her being, but love, she was beginning to realize, wasn't always enough to silence the ache of unfulfilled dreams. And soon, she would learn that love wasn't always enough to keep a man. Ava had always believed that love could withstand anything. That true love, the kind that burned deep and unwavering, would never falter. She had whispered vows of forever to Ethan, promising to stand by him through sickness and health, through triumph and despair. And she had meant every word. But life had a cruel way of testing love, and their test had come in the form of empty cribs and unanswered prayers. For years, they had fought against fate, determined to rewrite the destiny that had been cruelly handed to them. Doctor after doctor, treatment after treatment, endless appointments filled with sterile hospital rooms and hope that shattered like fragile glass. Ava had endured it all, hormone injections that left her weak, invasive procedures that drained her body, sleepless nights spent crying into her pillow so Ethan wouldn't hear her break. She had tried everything, and yet every month the answer remained the same: no child. At first, Ethan had been her rock. He had held her through the heartbreak, whispered reassurances that they had time, that miracles happened. He had kissed away her tears and promised her that they would keep trying no matter what. But as the years passed and Ava remained childless, something in him began to change. The gentle words became fewer. The nights he held her grew shorter. And then, one day, they stopped altogether. It started with the way he looked at her, like she was a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Ava noticed the shift in his eyes, the way love had started making way for frustration. She saw it in the way his hands clenched when another treatment failed. She felt it in the way he turned away from her at night, no longer holding her the way he once did. Ethan was slipping through her fingers, and she didn't know how to hold on. And then came the voices, the ones that weren't just in their home, but in the world outside. His mother, always sharp-tongued, always relentless. A wife's duty is to give her husband an heir, Ethan. What will happen to your legacy if she can't? Business associates who spoke in hushed whispers at parties. A man like Carter should have a son to take over his empire. Pity his wife can't give him one. Society, always judging, always reminding them that love alone was never enough. Ava heard the words, but never let them see how they pierced her. She kept smiling, kept pretending. She told herself that Ethan would fight for them, that their love would survive this storm. But then she saw it. The first crack that would shatter everything. It was the way he didn't correct his mother anymore, the way he let the words sink in, let them take root. It was the way he stopped reassuring her, the way he let silence answer where his love once did. It was the way he had started coming home later, the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his suits, the lingering text messages that made him turn his phone away when she entered the room. Ava wasn't foolish. She had loved Ethan long enough to know when he was slipping away. And nothing terrified her more than knowing she was losing the one man she had given her soul to. She prayed harder. She tried harder, but fate had already made its decision. And soon she would face a betrayal that would shatter her heart beyond repair. The evening air was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that suffocates, that weighs down on the chest like an unbearable burden. Ava sat at the grand dining table, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her untouched wineglass. The chandelier above them cast a golden glow, but no amount of light could warm the coldness that had settled between them. Ethan sat across from her, his jaw clenched, his eyes void of the love that once filled them. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking through her, like she was a stranger, like she was something replaceable. Ava swallowed the lump in her throat, trying to ignore the ache in her chest. She knew this conversation was coming, had seen the signs for months, but nothing could have prepared her for the words that would leave his lips that night. "I need an heir," Ethan said, his voice steady, detached, like he was discussing a business deal, not the love of his life. Ava's hands trembled. "Ethan, please." But he didn't stop. He wouldn't stop. "If you can't give me one, what's the point of this marriage?" The world around her shattered in an instant. Ava felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs, like she was drowning in an ocean of pain, unable to breathe. She searched his face, desperately looking for the man she had married, the man who had once promised to love her through everything. But he wasn't there. All that remained was a man who saw her as a failure. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking, "we can adopt. There are so many children who need love." "No," he cut her off sharply. "It's not the same." His tone was firm, final, and cruel. Ava's heart cracked open. "It's not about love, is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's about blood, about legacy." Ethan looked away, confirming what she already knew. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She refused to let him see her break. "Was this always the condition of our love?" she asked softly. "Did you only marry me because you thought I'd give you an heir?" Ethan exhaled, his frustration evident. "Ava, don't make this dramatic." She let out a bitter laugh. Dramatic? He was tearing their marriage apart, and he thought she was being dramatic. "I love you," she said, her voice cracking. "I love you more than anything in this world. And I thought—" She shook her head, her vision blurring with tears. "I thought love was enough." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples as if he was growing tired of the conversation. "Ava, I need a child. I need a son to carry my name, to take over what I've built." "And if I can't?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His silence was the only answer she needed. Ava's lips trembled as she stood from the table, the weight of his words crushing her. "I fought for us, Ethan," she whispered. "I fought so hard. But you've already given up on me, haven't you?" Still, he said nothing. And that silence was the loudest heartbreak of all. With one final look at the man she had given her entire soul to, Ava turned and walked away. Ethan let her go. He didn't realize it then, but that moment would be the beginning of his downfall. And Ava's rebirth. The divorce papers came swiftly, like a blade slicing through Ava's world. No hesitation, no remorse. Ethan Carter, the man she had built a life with, had erased her from his like she was nothing more than a forgotten chapter in his story. She sat in their once shared bedroom, staring at the cold, lifeless ink that sealed her fate. Irreconcilable differences. That's what the papers said. But Ava knew the truth. There were no differences. There was only betrayal. Ethan had made his decision the moment she couldn't give him what he wanted. A child, an heir, a piece of himself to carry on his legacy. And because she had failed, he had discarded her like an outdated contract, filing the papers without so much as a real goodbye. The house that once felt like a home now suffocated her with memories of whispered promises, stolen kisses, and dreams they had painted together. Dreams that had turned to ashes in her hands. She signed the papers, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. And just like that, Mrs. Ava Carter ceased to exist. The news broke within weeks. Billionaire CEO Ethan Carter finds love again with stunning young businesswoman Olivia Munro. Ava's hands trembled as she read the headlines. The ink on their divorce papers had barely dried, yet there he was, smiling in photographs with another woman on his arm, their faces glowing under flashing camera lights. Olivia Munro. She was everything society adored, young, ambitious, and strikingly beautiful. She had built a name for herself in the corporate world, but everyone knew what she truly wanted. Power. Status, the Carter name. And Ethan had handed it to her without hesitation. Ava watched as their wedding became the talk of the city. The lavish ceremony, the designer dress, the endless parade of guests who once called her Mrs. Carter. The same people who had smiled at Ava, dined at her table, praised her kindness. They had moved on just as quickly as Ethan had. In their eyes, she was old news, forgotten, replaced. She saw the images of Ethan and Olivia's honeymoon, white sandy beaches, private yachts, champagne kisses under the moonlight. And for the first time since her world had crumbled, Ava allowed herself to break. She cried, not just for the love she lost, but for the woman she used to be. The woman who believed in forever. The woman who gave everything to a man who never truly valued her. But as the tears dried, something shifted within her. A fire, a hunger. She wasn't going to let this betrayal define her. Ethan had replaced her, humiliated her, but she would rise. And one day, he would regret ever letting her go. Ava sat at the long mahogany desk in Ethan's office, their office. For the last time, the papers lay before her, a simple stack of documents that held the power to erase a decade of love, pain, and promises. Her hands trembled as she held the pen, her vision blurring with unshed tears. This was it, the end of everything. She had spent years building a life with Ethan, pouring every ounce of herself into their marriage. She had been his support system, his biggest cheerleader, the one who stood by his side when the world doubted him. And yet, none of it mattered now. He sat across from her, unreadable, his expression carved from stone. There was no hesitation in his gaze, no flicker of regret. He had moved on so easily, as if their love had been a mere stepping stone to something greater, something better. She inhaled sharply, forcing herself to remain composed. She would not break, not in front of him. "You don't have to do this, Ava," Ethan said suddenly, his voice carefully neutral. She looked up, her heart aching at the familiarity of his face. The man she once loved, the man who had loved her. But that love was gone now. It had been replaced by ambition, by greed, by a need for something she could never give him. "Yes, I do," she whispered. And with that, she pressed the pen to paper, signing away their marriage with a shaky breath. When she placed the pen down, something inside her shattered. It was over. She was no longer Ava Carter. Ethan had expected her to fight, to demand a share of his empire, to negotiate settlements, to cling to whatever scraps of wealth she could salvage, but she did none of that. "I don't want anything from you," she said, standing up. His brows furrowed. "Ava, you don't have to—" "I don't want your money, Ethan," she cut him off, her voice firmer now. "I never did." She saw the flicker of something in his expression, confusion, perhaps even guilt. She didn't care. She wouldn't let him buy her silence. She wouldn't let him reduce their love to a financial transaction. She had given him her heart. He had crushed it. That was payment enough. Ava grabbed the small suitcase by the door, her only belongings from their once lavish life. She didn't want the mansion, the designer clothes, the diamonds. They meant nothing without love. Ethan watched her walk to the door, something unreadable in his gaze. Maybe he expected her to turn back, to say something, to beg. But she didn't. She paused at the threshold, taking one last look at the man she had once believed was her forever. "I hope she's worth it," she whispered, and then she was gone. Ethan thought she would disappear into oblivion. He was wrong. Because Ava's story was just beginning. Ethan Carter had everything he ever wanted, or so he thought. Months had passed since Ava walked out of his life, and in that time he had thrown himself into his new marriage with Olivia Munro, the younger, more ambitious, and seemingly perfect wife. The media adored them, painting them as a power couple. Olivia, always poised and dazzling at high-profile events, basked in the attention, and Ethan, well, he convinced himself that he had finally found the future he deserved. Then came the news that made everything worth it. "Ethan, I'm pregnant." The words sent a rush of exhilaration through him. His dream was finally coming true. The heir he had longed for, the child that Ava could never give him, it was happening at last. He showered Olivia with gifts, fulfilled her every craving, and ensured she had the best medical care money could buy. Every ultrasound, every heartbeat, filled him with pride. This was his legacy, his future, the child that would carry his name. But fate had a cruel sense of humor, and karma never forgets. The day Olivia gave birth, Ethan felt like he was on top of the world. He held his newborn son for the first time, tracing his tiny features, marveling at the miracle in his arms. But then a whisper of doubt crept in. Something felt wrong. At first he brushed it off as exhaustion, but as the days passed, the unease only grew. The baby looked nothing like him. Ethan had strong, striking features, his jet-black hair, piercing blue eyes, the Carter family's unmistakable sharp jawline. But this child, his skin was a shade lighter. His hair had a soft curl that neither he nor Olivia had. His eyes, brown. The resemblance was non-existent. Ethan's mother was the first to say what he had been too afraid to voice. "Are you sure he's yours?" The question burned in his chest. Of course, the baby was his. Olivia was his wife. She wouldn't. But doubt is a parasite, and once it finds a home in the mind, it spreads like wildfire. Unable to silence the growing suspicion, Ethan ordered a DNA test in secret. The results arrived in a crisp envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it, a pit forming in his stomach. And then he saw it. 0% probability of paternity. The words blurred before his eyes, but their meaning was painfully clear. The child, his heir, his legacy, his everything, wasn't his. Olivia had betrayed him. The realization hit him like a freight train. His mind replayed the months leading up to the birth, her late nights out, her sudden interest in solo vacations, the way she sometimes avoided his touch with weak excuses. He had been blind. Rage coursed through his veins as he stormed into their penthouse that night, the DNA results clenched in his fist. Olivia, dressed in silk, lounged on their bed, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in the doorway. When she looked up, she saw something in his eyes, something dark. "What's wrong?" she asked, feigning concern. Ethan threw the papers onto the bed. "You tell me." She blinked, then glanced down at the results, and in that split second he saw it, the flicker of fear, the guilt she tried to mask. But it was too late. "Who is he?" Ethan demanded, his voice dangerously low. Olivia swallowed hard. "Ethan, Who is he?" he roared, his patience snapping like a brittle thread. Tears welled in her eyes, but they meant nothing to him now. He had loved her, trusted her, left his wife for her. And this was how she repaid him? "His name is Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan felt his world tilt. Daniel, his business partner, his friend. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound he had ever known. "You destroyed everything," he said, his voice hollow. "You made a fool of me." Olivia tried to reach for him, but he stepped back as if her touch was poison. "Ethan, please, But he was already turning away. She had taken everything from him. His pride, his trust, his future, and now he had nothing. Just like Ava. And for the first time since he left her, Ethan finally understood what true heartbreak felt like. This was karma, and it had come for him in the cruelest way possible. Ethan Carter had once been untouchable, a self-made billionaire, a respected CEO, a man who had everything, power, wealth, and a future carefully crafted to ensure his legacy. He had built his empire from the ground up, convinced that nothing could shake him. But karma always collects its debts. And Ethan was paying the price. The scandal surrounding Olivia's betrayal spread like wildfire. The tabloids had a field day, plastering his humiliation across every headline. Billionaire Ethan Carter's wife gives birth to another man's child. CEO cuckolded, Olivia Carter's secret affair exposed. The price of betrayal? Ethan Carter's downfall begins. His business partners began distancing themselves, wary of associating with a man whose personal life had become a public disaster. Investors pulled out, stocks plummeted, clients lost trust. The whispers followed him everywhere, at board meetings, at high-end galas, even in the very office he had once ruled with an iron grip. If he couldn't even control his own wife, how can he lead a company? The murmurs of doubt, the judgment in their eyes, it was suffocating. But the worst blow was yet to come. Olivia didn't just betray him, she destroyed him. With ruthless precision, she filed for divorce and demanded half of his fortune. And she won. Ethan had made the fatal mistake of believing she loved him unconditionally, so he never signed a prenuptial agreement. The courts favored her, and soon what was once his was now hers. The mansion, the luxury cars, the penthouse apartment they once shared, everything he had once built, gone. Ethan sat in his empty office, staring at the legal documents that sealed his fate. His hands, once steady and powerful, now trembled with rage and regret. He had traded Ava for Olivia. He had abandoned a woman who truly loved him for one who only loved his wealth. And now Olivia had left him in ruins, walking away with everything while he was left picking up the broken pieces of his life. His financial empire, once untouchable, was now crumbling. With the loss of investors, lawsuits piling up, and the massive settlement he owed Olivia, his accounts were bleeding dry. The mansion he once shared with Ava was put on the market. The private jets were sold. The man who once had everything was now drowning in debt. One by one, the people who had once surrounded him, the so-called friends, the business partners who toasted to his success, disappeared. They had never cared about him. They had cared about his status, his wealth, his influence. And now that all of that was gone, so were they. Alone, broke, and filled with nothing but regret, Ethan finally understood the pain he had inflicted on Ava. He had tossed her aside like she was worthless. Now, he was the one left behind. He was the one no one wanted. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter was truly, utterly destroyed. Ethan had no intention of attending the charity gala that night. These events used to be his domain, grand halls filled with powerful elites, glasses of expensive champagne clinking in the air, people vying for his attention. But now he was just another guest, barely acknowledged, his presence tolerated rather than celebrated. Yet something had drawn him here. Or perhaps it was fate, setting the stage for his reckoning. As he stood by the bar, sipping a drink he could barely afford anymore, the murmur of the crowd suddenly changed. Conversations slowed, eyes widened, whispers spread like wildfire. And then he saw her. Ava. She entered the room with effortless grace, draped in an emerald-green gown that hugged her curves like it was made for her. Her hair cascaded down her shoulders in soft waves, her skin radiant under the golden lights. There was a glow to her, confidence, elegance, power. But it wasn't just her transformation that left Ethan breathless. It was the undeniable roundness of her stomach. Ava was pregnant. His heart slammed against his ribs as shock paralyzed him. This wasn't possible. She had spent years with him, unable to conceive. And yet, here she was, carrying another man's child, looking happier than he had ever seen her. Who was he? Who had given her what he never could? Rage and jealousy burned through his veins as he watched her move through the room, effortlessly commanding attention. The same people who had once pitied her now admired her. She was no longer the abandoned wife of Ethan Carter. She was someone greater. Ethan's eyes darted around, searching for the man responsible for the life growing inside her. Then he saw him. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped beside Ava, his hand resting gently on the small of her back, a protective, intimate gesture. He wasn't dressed like the usual high society elites, no designer labels, no expensive watch. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need wealth to be noticed. And when Ava turned to him, her eyes softened with something Ethan hadn't seen in years. Love. The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. She had moved on. She had found happiness without him. And judging by the way she smiled at the man beside her, she had found something real, something he had never given her. As the couple made their way toward the VIP section, Ava's gaze drifted across the room. For a split second, their eyes met. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Would she ignore him? Would she look away? But what happened next shattered him more than anything. She smiled, not a bitter smile, not a vengeful one, a genuine, serene smile, as if she was at peace, as if she had truly let him go. And that was the moment Ethan Carter realized he had lost her forever. Ethan Carter had spent years believing a single, inescapable truth. Ava could never have children. It was the reason their marriage had crumbled, the reason he had abandoned the woman who had once been his everything. And yet, there she was, standing across the ballroom, radiant and visibly pregnant. The sight of her, glowing, confident, happy, sent his mind into a spiral. This wasn't possible. Had the doctors been wrong? Had she lied to him? Or was this some kind of cruel joke? The thought of her carrying another man's child made his stomach churn with an emotion he didn't want to name: jealousy, regret, loss. Ethan needed answers, and he needed them now. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just moved. Pushing through the crowd, ignoring the curious glances and whispers, he made his way toward her. His heart pounded, his pulse roaring in his ears. Ava had just finished speaking to an investor when she turned, and for the second time that evening, their eyes met. This time, he saw it. A flicker of recognition, a flicker of pain. But she didn't look away. She didn't run. She stood her ground. He stopped mere inches away, closer than he had been to her in over a year. His voice came out rough, unsteady. Ava. She tilted her head, her lips curving into a polite but distant smile. Ethan. The sound of his name on her lips sent a pang through his chest. It wasn't warm. It wasn't familiar. It was foreign, distant, and that hurt more than he cared to admit. His eyes flickered down to her stomach, then back to her face. His jaw tightened. "You're pregnant." Ava's expression didn't change. She didn't flinch, didn't falter. "Yes," she said simply. Ethan swallowed hard. How? Not the delivery boy. Not the man he had once mocked. But there he was. Noah Pierce. The same man Ethan had barely acknowledged in the past. The one who had once worked as nothing more than a delivery driver for his company. And yet he stood there now, wealthy, successful, and holding Ava's heart in a way Ethan never had. The truth slammed into him like a truck. Ava hadn't just moved on. She had moved up. And Ethan Carter had never been more insignificant. Ethan Carter had spent years making decisions with absolute certainty. He was a man who took what he wanted, who dictated the course of his life without hesitation. But now, standing before Ava, his ex-wife, his greatest regret, the woman he had betrayed, for the first time in his life, he was uncertain. His heart pounded as he took a deep breath and stepped closer, his voice rough and unsteady. "Ava, can we talk?" She studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, with the grace and kindness that had always set her apart, she nodded. "All right." Desperate for answers, Ethan led her to a quieter corner of the gala, away from the curious gazes and whispers. His hands trembled slightly as he turned to face her. "I need to understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "How is this possible? You were never supposed to be able to have children?" Ava finished for him, arching a brow. He swallowed hard and nodded. She let out a soft sigh, placing a protective hand on her swollen belly. "After the divorce, I decided to get a second opinion. I went to a specialist, a different doctor. And do you know what I found out?" Ethan's stomach twisted into knots. He already knew the answer, but he needed to hear her say it. She met his gaze, her voice calm but firm. "I was never the problem, Ethan." His chest tightened. "You were." The truth was like a slap to the face. All those years, all the pain, all the resentment he had thrown at her. And it had never been her fault. She had begged him to consider adoption. She had pleaded for his love, his support, and he had walked away. Ethan's throat was dry. But Ava wasn't done. The man who loved her right. "I won't lie to you," she continued. "After our divorce, I was broken. I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never find happiness again." Ethan clenched his fists, guilt wrapping around his chest like a vice. "But then I met Lucas." The name sent a fresh wave of jealousy through him. He forced himself to ask, "Who is he?" Ava's lips curled into a soft smile, the kind Ethan hadn't seen in years. "He's my husband," she said simply. Ethan felt his entire body tense. Lucas, her husband, not a rebound, not a fleeting romance, but a man who had given her what he never could. "He's a doctor," she continued, "humble, kind, and patient. He didn't care about my past. He didn't see me as broken." She paused, looking him straight in the eyes. "He saw me. He loved me for who I was, not for what I could give him." Ethan felt the sting of those words like a knife to the heart. Hadn't he done the opposite? Hadn't he only valued her as long as she fit his perfect vision of a wife? The child that could have been his Ava's fingers traced slow circles over her belly. "And then, something I never expected happened," she said softly. Ethan couldn't tear his eyes away. "You got pregnant." She nodded. "Naturally." His breath caught. "So it's true," he whispered. "You were never infertile." Ava's eyes held a quiet sadness. "No, Ethan, I wasn't." A lump formed in his throat. This could have been our child. If he had been patient, if he had chosen love over legacy, if he had believed in her, in them, instead of listening to his pride and his mother's poisoned words. He had thrown her away for something she had never been guilty of. He had lost everything for a lie, the plea of a broken man. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his chest aching. "Ava." His voice wavered. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." She didn't respond, just watched him with a quiet strength that only made his regret heavier. "I thought I needed an heir. I thought my legacy was the most important thing in the world." He let out a bitter laugh. "But what good is a legacy when you have no one to share it with?" For the first time in his life, Ethan Carter felt truly, utterly lost. And then he said the words he never thought he'd say. "Ava, I miss you." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, something deep, something unreadable. "I know." Silence stretched between them. Hope flickered in Ethan's heart. Had he been too late? Or was there still a chance to make things right? As he waited for her response, the weight of his choices settled over him. Ava had moved on. She had found love again. But was there still a part of her that remembered what they once had? Could she ever forgive him? Did he even deserve it? Ethan Carter had spent his life believing in his own strength, his own invincibility. He was a man who built an empire from the ground up, who never second-guessed himself, who dictated how life should unfold. But now, standing in front of Ava, watching her stroke the swell of her stomach, he felt like a man who had lost everything. The woman he once called his wife had moved on, and she was carrying another man's child, a child that could have been his, if only he had known the truth. The revelation that shattered him. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava. How do you know? How can you be sure? Ava sighed, crossing her arms as she met his gaze head-on. There was no hatred in her eyes, no anger, just pity. And somehow, that hurt more than any resentment she could have thrown at him. After the divorce, I saw a specialist, she said calmly. I wanted closure, Ethan. I needed to understand why I couldn't have a child with you, but what I found out... She shook her head, letting out a breath. It changed everything. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Ava took a step closer, her voice gentle yet firm. I wasn't infertile, Ethan, I never was. His stomach twisted. That's not possible. The tests were inconclusive, she cut in. The doctors assumed it was me because I was the woman. But they never fully tested you, did they? His throat went dry. Number he had never needed to be tested. His whole life he had been strong, capable, a man. Why would he question his ability to father a child? I asked for the full workup, Ava continued, and my doctor told me something no one had ever considered before. She took a deep breath. The issue wasn't me, it was you. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. No, he shook his head. That's not. It is. Ava's eyes softened, but she didn't back down. You had an undiagnosed medical condition, Ethan, something from your past, maybe childhood, maybe stress, maybe genetics, but it left you sterile. The word hit like a bullet. Sterile. The air he had spent his life craving. The reason he had thrown Ava away, it had never been possible. His entire reason for divorcing her had been built on a lie. He stumbled back, running a hand through his hair. That can't be true. Ava let out a slow, measured breath. I didn't want to believe it either. But the proof is right here, Ethan. She gestured to her belly, her voice gentle but unyielding. I conceived naturally, and not just once. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. What? Ava hesitated before dropping the final blow. I lost my first pregnancy, a few months after Lucas and I got married. Her voice wavered slightly, but she quickly composed herself. But when I got pregnant again, my doctors confirmed it. There was never anything wrong with me. Ethan's vision blurred. 2 pregnancies, 2 children that could have been his. If only he had waited. If only he had been patient. If only he had loved her enough to fight for them instead of discarding her like a broken dream. He had blamed Ava. He had resented her. He had convinced himself that she was the reason his legacy would die with him. But in the end, he was the one who was never meant to have an heir. The weight of regret. Ethan felt his chest tighten as memories flooded his mind. Ava Ethan Carter had always believed that power and wealth could fix anything. Deals could be renegotiated, fortunes could be rebuilt, and lost opportunities could be reclaimed. But this? There was no undoing this. His greatest mistake stood before him, a living, breathing consequence of his own arrogance. Ava, his ex-wife, the woman he had discarded, was glowing with happiness, carrying a child that could have been his, and she was no longer his to love. A broken plea, Ethan's voice cracked as he stepped closer. Ava, please, I was wrong. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply watched him, her hand resting gently on her belly. I should have never left you, he continued, his desperation rising. I was blinded by my own pride, by my family's expectations, by everything but the one thing that truly mattered, you. Ava's lips parted, as if she might say something. Hope flickered in his chest. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe... But then a firm, steady voice shattered his illusion. She doesn't belong to you anymore. Ethan turned sharply, and there he was. Lucas, the man who had given Ava everything Ethan had thrown away. Face to face with the better man, Lucas stood beside Ava, his arm protectively around her waist. He wasn't flashy, wasn't dripping with wealth or power, but what he had was something Ethan had never possessed, a love that was unconditional, unwavering and pure. Ethan clenched his fists. Stay out of this. But Lucas didn't flinch. His gaze was calm, unwavering. This stopped being your business the day you left her. The words cut deeper than Ethan wanted to admit. He turned back to Ava, his eyes pleading. Ava, you have to know, I regret everything. If I could go back, if I could change it all. But you can't, Ava said softly, her voice laced with finality. Ethan froze. I spent years wondering what I did wrong, she continued, her eyes glistening. I thought I was broken. I thought I wasn't enough. But it was never me, Ethan. It was you who failed us. Ethan swallowed hard. Ava, I loved you, she whispered, but love wasn't enough for you. You wanted an heir, you wanted a legacy, and I was just an obstacle in your way. His heart clenched. That's not true. She gave him a sad smile. Isn't it? Ethan felt his world collapse around him. She had moved on. And Lucas, he had been the one to pick up the pieces. The realization that came too late. Ethan had spent his entire life chasing things, money, power, control. He had walked away from the only person who had ever loved him unconditionally. And now, she belonged to someone else. His voice was barely above a whisper. Do you still love me? For a moment, Ava hesitated. A flicker of the past reflected in her eyes, a memory of what once was. But then she took Lucas's hand and smiled. A smile Ethan had once lived for. I love the life I have now. Ethan staggered back, his chest hollow. The truth was undeniable. She wasn't his Ava anymore. She was Lucas's wife, the mother of his child, and the woman Ethan had lost forever. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter, the once mighty CEO who had everything, truly had nothing. Ethan Carter sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by silence. The once luxurious space, filled with the finest furniture and rarest artwork, now felt cold, empty, lifeless. Just like him, he had spent years chasing wealth, power, and an heir to carry on his name. In doing so, he had cast aside the one person who had loved him not for his money, not for his status, but for who he was. And now, Ava was gone. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, completely. She had moved on. She had found happiness, and she had done it without him. The weight of regret. Ethan gripped a glass of whiskey, but even the burn of the expensive liquor couldn't numb the ache in his chest. He had always thought he would have time, that if things didn't work out with Olivia, he could fix things with Ava. That maybe, just maybe, she would be waiting for him. But she hadn't waited. Why would she? Ethan had made his choice, and now she had made hers. He reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over Ava's contact. He still had her number. He had never been able to delete it, but what would he even say? I'm sorry wouldn't change the past. I miss you wouldn't erase the pain he caused. I love you wouldn't bring her back. A notification popped up on his screen, a news article. His breath hitched when he saw the headline, Doctor. Lucas Bennett and wife Ava announced the birth of their son. There was a picture. Ava was in a hospital bed, cradling a newborn baby in her arms, while Lucas kissed her forehead. She looked radiant, happy, loved. Ethan's vision blurred. That was supposed to be his life, his wife, his family. But it never had been. And now, it never would be. A legacy that was never his. Ethan had sacrificed love for legacy. And in the end, he had neither. His empire had crumbled. His reputation was in ruins. Olivia had taken half of his fortune, leaving him drowning in lawsuits and debts. He had spent his life believing that his name, his bloodline, his power were the only things that mattered. But when he looked around, he saw the truth. None of it mattered without love. And love was something he could never buy back. Ethan Carter sat alone in the darkness of his penthouse, the walls closing in on him. The empire he once ruled had crumbled, the legacy he sacrificed everything for had vanished, and the woman he had betrayed had won. Not in a way that involved wealth or revenge. No, Ava's victory was something far greater. She had found true happiness, and that was the sweetest revenge of all. A new beginning for Ava. In a warm, sunlit hospital room, Ava held her newborn son in her arms. Lucas sat beside her, gently stroking her hair as he gazed down at their child with overwhelming love. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Ava smiled through happy tears, cradling the tiny life in her arms. She had spent years believing she was broken, that she would never experience this moment. But here she was, a mother, a wife, a woman who had risen from heartbreak and betrayal. Lucas leaned closer. "What should we name him?" Ava glanced at her son, her heart full. "Noah," she said softly. "It means peace, because that's what he's given me." Lucas kissed her again. "Noah Bennett, I love it." Ava exhaled deeply, closing her eyes. She had everything she ever wanted, and she had earned it. A life without Ava. Ethan stared at the headline again. Dr. Lucas Bennett and wife Ava announced the birth of their son. It was everywhere. Social media, news articles, business networks. Everyone was celebrating Ava's happiness. Once she had been his wife, his partner, his future. Now she belonged to someone else. Ethan could have had everything, a loving wife, a family, a real legacy. But he had thrown it away for a fantasy. Now he was left with nothing but regret. He reached for his phone, his fingers shaking, one call, one message. But then, as if the universe was mocking him, his phone lit up with a new notification. Ava's Instagram. She had posted a picture. Ava, glowing with happiness, holding baby Noah in her arms while Lucas kissed her cheek. The caption was simple: "My forever, my family, my love." Ethan's grip tightened around his phone. His chest ached, his vision blurred. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what loss meant, and the cruelest part. Ava never had to lift a finger for revenge. Her happiness alone was enough to destroy him. Love is not measured by what someone can give you. True love is unconditional. A marriage is not a contract of convenience. It is a bond of trust, respect, and unwavering support. The worth of a person is never defined by their ability to bear children. Love should never come with conditions. When you prioritize ego over love, you risk losing everything that truly matters. A woman is not a machine for producing heirs. She is a human being deserving of love, care, and dignity. The greatest wealth in life is not money, but the people who stand by you when everything else crumbles. Never let society dictate the value of your relationship. Love is meant to be cherished, not calculated. Sometimes the greatest betrayals are not the ones done to us, but the ones we commit against our own hearts. A man who trades love for power will one day find himself with neither. Women are stronger than society gives them credit for. Their worth does not depend on their ability to bear children. The most painful heartbreak is realizing that you lost someone who was willing to fight for you. Time does not wait for anyone. If you do not appreciate love when you have it, you may never get it back. A person who sacrifices love for status will one day be left with an empty heart. Regret is the cruelest punishment because it reminds you of what you can never change. No wealth in the world can fill the void of a broken heart. The love you abandon today may be the love you beg for tomorrow. Betrayal is not always about infidelity. It is also about breaking the trust of the one who loved you the most. Sometimes, karma doesn't come in the form of revenge. It comes in the form of watching someone else live the life you lost. You can replace a person, but you can never replace the love they gave you. The loneliest feeling in the world is realizing you were the villain in your own love story. Women are not weak. They are warriors who rise from the ashes of their pain. A broken heart can destroy some, but for others, it is the beginning of their greatest transformation. A woman's love is her greatest gift, but once you lose it, it may never return. Society often underestimates a woman's strength, but time proves she is capable of standing on her own. No woman should be made to feel incomplete because she cannot bear children. Her worth is far greater than that. When a woman heals from heartbreak, she does not just survive, she thrives. There is no revenge stronger than a woman who finds happiness without the one who doubted her. The most beautiful transformation happens when a woman realizes she does not need validation from anyone. A woman betrayed does not stay broken. She rises, stronger and more radiant than before. The love a woman gives is a blessing. To discard it is the greatest mistake a man can make. Money can buy luxury, but it can never buy true love. A mansion without love is just a prison decorated with gold. No empire is strong enough to replace the warmth of a loving embrace. Power is temporary, but the love of a loyal heart lasts forever. Those who build their happiness on material wealth often find themselves the loneliest. A powerful man without love is just a lonely soul in an expensive suit. Betrayal for ambition leads to nothing but regret. A name, a legacy, and an empire mean nothing when you have no one to share them with. The price of greed is loneliness, and the price of love is sacrifice. Choose wisely. A man who chases status over love will one day find himself with neither. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is living a life of happiness. The universe has its own way of delivering justice. Often it is through success and peace. Seeing someone else happy is the greatest punishment for those who once doubted them. Moving on is not about forgetting the past. It is about creating a future so beautiful that the past no longer matters. The day you stop seeking revenge is the day you truly win. The best revenge is a life filled with laughter, love, and new beginnings. Success is the answer to betrayal, and peace is the answer to heartbreak. A woman who glows after heartbreak is a woman who has found her true self. Healing is not about forgetting, it is about growing beyond the pain. When you finally find happiness without the one who hurt you, you will understand that the past was never worth your tears. Love should never be a business transaction. It is meant to be selfless and pure. A relationship built on conditions will never last. Every choice has a consequence. Make sure your choices are worth the risk. Never take someone's love for granted. Once lost, it may never return. A heart that truly loves does not care about status, wealth, or social approval. The people who truly love you are more valuable than all the riches in the world. The world's opinion should never dictate who you choose to love. Some betrayals are irreversible. Once you lose someone's trust, you may never earn it back. Love should never be abandoned for ambition. True success is having someone to share it with. Happiness does not come from money, power, or legacy. It comes from the love you nurture. At the end of life, no one remembers how much money you had. They remember how much love you gave. The only legacy that matters is the impact you leave on people's hearts. Time will reveal the truth, what you gave up and what you lost in the process. If you love someone, cherish them before it's too late. And finally, never trade true love for an illusion of success, because the only real success is love itself. This message perfectly reflects the lessons from the story. Would you like me to add anything else or refine it further? Life has a way of teaching us lessons, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. Ethan had it all, wealth, power, and status, but he lost the one thing that truly mattered: love. Ava was once broken, but she rose stronger, proving that true happiness comes from within. This is more than just a story, it's a reflection of the choices we make in life. How often do we chase things that we believe will bring happiness, only to realize they were never important? Ethan's biggest mistake wasn't losing his fortune, it was losing a woman who loved him unconditionally. He believed Ava was the problem, only to learn too late that he was the one who was incomplete. This story teaches us that love should never be measured by conditions or expectations. No one should be discarded simply because they don't meet society's standards. True love is not about perfection, it's about standing together through every storm. Ava found happiness not because she sought revenge, but because she chose herself. She proved that walking away from pain is sometimes the best form of justice. She was never weak. She was just waiting for the moment to show her strength. Ethan's regret came too late. By the time he wanted her back, she had already moved on. This is the price of betrayal, when you realize what you lost after it's too late. No amount of money can buy back time or undo the past. Love isn't something you replace like a business deal. It's a treasure that once lost may never return. What Ethan learned too late is what we must all remember. Cherish love before it's gone. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. What truly matters to you? Is it power and wealth? Or is it the people who stand beside you, no matter what? Ava's journey is a testament to every person who has been abandoned, yet found the strength to rise. She was once seen as weak, but she became unstoppable when she chose her happiness. How many people in the world are like Ethan, blinded by ego, only to realize their mistake too late? And how many people like Ava have suffered in silence, only to come out stronger? Life does not wait for second chances. Sometimes the opportunity to make things right never comes again. Ethan had the love of a woman who would have stood by him forever, but he threw it away. His regret is a lesson for all of us. Never take the people who love you for granted. If you love someone, tell them. If you cherish someone, show them. Because one day you might wake up and realize they're gone, and there's nothing you can do to bring them back. Ava's sweet revenge wasn't in hurting Ethan, it was in showing him that she never needed him to be happy. Happiness is the greatest revenge. Peace is the greatest justice. This is what Ava proved. You don't need to seek revenge. Life will take care of it for you. Sometimes, the best way to move forward is to let go of the past completely. Ava never looked back, and that's why she found true happiness. Ethan, on the other hand, had everything until he had nothing. His name, his fortune, his status, none of it could bring him peace. Because peace doesn't come from power, it comes from love. And love, once lost, is the most painful thing to live without. This story is more than fiction. It's a lesson that applies to real life. How many people spend their lives chasing status only to end up alone? How many people throw away real love thinking they can find something better? And how many of them realize too late that true love is rare? This is a reminder to appreciate what you have before you lose it, to value the people who love you for who you are, not what you have, because in the end, the only thing that truly matters is love. If this story moved you, let it be a reminder to never let pride ruin what truly matters. Tell the people in your life how much they mean to you before it's too late. And if you've ever been like Ava, left behind and heartbroken, remember this: your time to shine is coming. One day, the people who doubted you will watch you thrive. And on that day, you won't need revenge. You'll already have everything you ever wanted. Did this story touch your heart? Then don't just keep it to yourself, share it. Leave a comment and tell us your thoughts. Have you ever seen karma in action? Do you believe in second chances, or do you think some betrayal should never be forgiven? Let's talk about it in the comments below. We love hearing your stories. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because we bring you the most emotional, heart-touching stories every single week. Love, betrayal, redemption, every story has a lesson to teach us. And we promise the next one will be just as powerful as this one. So don't miss out. Be part of our storytelling family. Together, we'll explore the deepest emotions that make us human. Remember, love is a gift. If you have it, cherish it. Never trade love for wealth, because wealth can be regained, but a lost heart may never return. And if you've ever been hurt, don't let that pain define you. Let it transform you. Ava's story isn't just hers. It belongs to every person who has ever been underestimated. And it's proof that even after the deepest betrayal, happiness is still possible. No storm lasts forever. The sun always rises after the darkest night. If you're going through heartbreak, know that your best days are still ahead. You are stronger than you think. You deserve love that is unconditional and pure. And one day, you will find it. Before you go, if this story touched your heart, show your love by liking this video. Your support helps us create more stories that inspire, heal, and empower. And if you want more, don't forget to subscribe. Together, let's keep sharing stories that remind us of the power of love. Because love always finds a way, even after betrayal.